right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. And today on the show, it's a wild one. We are talking about Gaspar Noe's Climax. This is a crazy, weird movie, and it's one that I wanted to get up, even though it's in very limited release and might not still be in theaters. Usually when a movie is already about to be gone from theaters, I will hold off until the VOD release. But it is still in some theaters, and it really deserves to be seen on a big screen. So I wanted to do this episode. Maybe, if it gets a couple of extra people into the seats, I will be happy, because this movie is crazy and unique and interesting. It's about a French dance troupe who are... after their rehearsals for their upcoming performances, they decide to take the night off and have some sangria. But unfortunately, someone spiked the sangria, and everybody begins to lose their mind. It is a very weird movie, very cool movie, very interesting, and like I said, unique. Joining me for this one is Kris Krainock. And before we jump into the conversation, I do want to remind you to please make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together on your podcast app of choice. And you can also follow us on social media at PiecingPod. And I'll tell you a bunch of other stuff to do after the conversation. But for now, let's get into it. All right, back on the show with us, Kris Krainock. How you doing, Kris?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. I just upgraded my studio with this monitor, so I'm looking over it at you. It's kind of weird.
I like it.
Yeah.
Like you're peeking over at me.
Yeah. I see your full face, though, which is good.
Yeah, I can still see you all the way up to the chin.
The people at home have no clue what I'm talking about, but maybe I'll take a picture at some point.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But
as long as I can see your eyes, your beautiful eyes.
Thank you
all
very
that matters.
much. Thank you very much for that. Speaking of beautiful eyes, we're talking about Gaspar Noe's Climax.
Oh, yeah.
Was that any kind of transition? I don't know if that made sense at all.
I don't think so.
No.
I went with it.
All right. Well, Climax is absolutely crazy movie. One, I actually have only seen Irreversible of his films.
Okay.
I always wanted to see Into the Void, just never quite got around to it. And I was going to watch it in anticipation of our conversation today, and just didn't get a chance to. But
yeah, I mean, some of his films are harder to track down. I mean, they're typically not rated. They don't get a wide release. I think Climax has been the most accessible, maybe besides Irreversible. The first one that I saw was Irreversible, and that left a very lasting impression on me. And then for me, Enter the Void, and a movie that he made called Love, which is very explicit, basically pornography with a 3D ejaculating penis. What I like about Noe is that he takes a lot of risks and he's very bold. Sometimes it works better at times than others, you know what I mean? Sometimes it's like the shock value, I think, kind of eclipses the movie.
Right.
But I really admire the guy. Even though I don't love everything that he makes, I really admire him. And I think I really loved and admired Climax, which is cool.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is, I mean, right up front, I guess we're both going to say we loved this movie. It's the first movie this year I've seen twice in the theater. And it's such an experience of a movie. I mean, there's so much to it. It's like I said earlier, it's just a crazy film, and it was really, really enjoyable in a way if you're into things that are, like that are really kind of just mind bending in a way, know?
Yeah, that's the thing is there's never any set roadmap of what kind of creative risks you can take and what's too self-indulgent, and in this particular film, it starts at the ending and ends at the beginning, and then kind of taking the Pulp Fiction idea to an extreme. It's you have to watch the end credits first, and and there were a couple cute things in there that were a little cutesy. And at the very first, I was okay. I was we're gonna just do this. This is a little easy.
Which was kind of done in Vox Lux as well, which we just spoke about.
Yeah, exactly. It's true. but as soon, quickly, any of those reservations, they just went away. They evaporated because the movie was so hypnotic. And the thing about the movie is, we're going to talk about its influences today, and it really wears its influences on its sleeve.
Oh, yeah.
But what's so cool about the movie, in my opinion, is that it transcends those influences, that it's so open about and so transparent about, and saying, I was influenced by this, or this is what it's going to be like. And yet it's wholly original. It walked that fine line. I don't know how it did it, but I haven't seen anything like Climax before, even though I've seen all the references and blah, 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 blah. It still was extremely unique and exciting and palpable and terrifying and cinematic.
Absolutely. And, I mean, we might as well jump right in. So we kind of discussed this ahead of time in lieu of a first puzzle piece. You're going to kind of take us through and I'm glad you're here for this episode, because I know as I was watching it the first time and I saw all of the VHS tapes sitting around the TV screen, which happens up on the screen.
Yep.
You just know that these are movies that were inspirational for Gaspar Noe. I mean, right off the bat, I saw Suspiria on there, and so I just knew that clued me in right away. Oh, well, I know this is about to be a crazy horror dance movie.
Yeah,
and
scary dancing.
Yeah, so I know we're looking at inspirations right here. So, I mean, to kick off getting into inspirations, why don't you run us through some of these, because I'm sure you've seen quite a few of those.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate to be able to see, I think, all of them.
Yeah?
I remember. Yeah, I believe so.
Nice.
So I'm not going to name all of them because there was a lot. We don't have the time to talk about every single one of them.
Sure.
But so the thing is, for those of you who haven't seen the movie, one of the opening shots of the film is going to be a static shot of a TV. And on either side of the television is going to be a list of movies, like a VHS tapes, and the other side is books. And it's a very obvious way of saying, hey, these are the things that are influencing me. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but the shot is long because it plays several audition tapes for these dancers talking about why they want to join this dance troupe. And this is a theme that is started in this particular shot that goes throughout the entire movie, which is kind of testing the audience. There's long takes. It's not cutting right away. It's redundant. So there's several videos over and over again of different people talking, answering questions. And it kind of gives you time to look around the frame.
Yeah,
it's letting you go, hey, look, explore all these titles. So that was a fun balancing act of like, do I want to watch what's on the screen, are these people speaking, or do I want to look at the movies?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, so a couple of movies that were listed in that shot were a movie called Shivers, which is a David Cronenberg film, and I think this is definitely a big influence on this film, Climax. David Cronenberg is a famous kind of really insane Canadian filmmaker that does. A lot of what's like a subgenre called body horror.
Yeah.
And it's not, I don't think that Gaspar Noe is necessarily a body horror person, but I think the human physical form plays a dramatic role, maybe not to the extent of Cronenberg. Yeah. But there's something so bodily about Climax in particular in his other films. With movies like Love, it's very sexy and pornographic, to where a movie like Climax, it's just the physical anguish of the horror. So I think David Cronenberg was a huge influence there. Mm-hmm. Of course, the thing that popped out first was Salò, or the 120 Days of Sodom, which is the Pasolini. I guess you can call it a masterpiece. It really is a masterpiece of disturbing filmmaking. It's a political allegory movie made by an Italian filmmaker named Pier Pablo Pasolini, and who was actually shot down in the street by a lover. He had his own torrid life. But it's a political allegory about what he felt fascism was doing to Italy. So where he felt in a political realm, the fascists were basically raping the innocence of Italy. He used that, and now it's an aristocratic group of people that represent the fascists, and it's only teenagers that represent the people of Italy. And so these aristocratic people force a bunch of teenagers into a mansion, and they torture them horrendously, and they make them, females can't have sex with males, and vice versa. So males are forced to engage in homosexual sex against their will. There's a famous sequence of a girl having to bend down and eating feces off the ground, and a bunch of kids putting nails in their mouth. It's a horrifying movie. And what's really disturbing about Salò, it's probably, easily maybe one of the most disturbing films of all time, is that we're so accustomed to these movies like Hostel, which are these graphic films, and there's almost kind of a cartoonish quality about them. But Salò is such a serious art film that's so well crafted and so well made that it's unnerving even more so.
Right, it's disturbing versus just being like gore porn.
Something. Exactly. And I can definitely see just the mentality that Noe is influenced by Pasolini, because it was such a bold film and statement. Truly horrifying movie. In fact, I showed it at Cinemondays, the free art house cinema that I'd love to bring back from the dead and keep showing free movies that I used to host with Vivian Martin, my friend. And we showed Salò, and we had almost 100% walkout. It was packed, and there was one person that stayed in the back, and this is the ironic part, is there's these like horrible images of kids getting scalped and all these things. And then there's just like one explicit shot of two men having sex, and the guy behind me was like, "Fuck you, Krainock." And I was like, that's the thing? Like, that's the one. This is the least disturbing moment. It's kind of a relief. I'm relieved to watch this after just watching a child be scalped.
That's an act of love, right?
Right. I was like, in the context of this movie, this is a beautiful moment. And I'm getting a fuck you from that. Anyway, so I won't ramble on all these titles, but those are just some of the more important ones. Un Chien Andalou, which is the iconic surrealist film made by Luis Buñuel and Salvador Dali, which basically changed cinema entirely. You've probably seen at least an image from it of a girl getting her eyeball slit with a straight razor. That was on the list. That's a brilliant film. What I was extremely surprised to see on that list was the inauguration of the Pleasure Dome, which is a short film by a crazy guy from the 1930s called Kenneth Anger. And he was as angry as his name sounded. He was one of the first openly homosexual filmmakers in America. He made a lot of short features on film that were extremely surreal. The Pleasure Dome film is kind of a biblical send-up with kind of a demonic imagery type film, kind of an Aleister Crowley type aesthetic, where all these different biblical characters and literary characters and historical characters kind of work and function and move around this Pleasure Dome. Really interesting to see that. Of course, the original Suspiria was on there. A movie called Zombie was on there, a very famous zombie movie. And then a movie called Quarrel, which is kind of it's a French word for quarrel, like a fight. And that was made by the great Rainer Werner Fassbinder, one of my all-time favorite filmmakers. And that was actually his last film, which was released posthumously after he was found dead in his hotel room in Cannes, France, during the Cannes Film Festival. Nice. So yeah, those were the main ones on the list that I wanted to talk about briefly that were actually shown up on the screen, saying, hey, this is really what influenced us. And so not only do you get from a cinematic standpoint, these movies feel a little bit like Climax, but it's more about, I think, the philosophy of the filmmakers. You look at Fassbinder, he was an anarchist, in a lot of ways. He'd make entire feature films in 11 days. And people that worked for him had to quit because they couldn't keep going at his pace.
Right.
He was a political filmmaker. One of his famous quotes was, "I don't throw bombs, I make films." So Fassbinder was a fascinating guy. Another very open homosexual director, which was, of course, very kind of taboo in the 70s. So that was interesting. And then Pasolini, of course, and Buñuel. These are all subversive filmmakers, which I think Noe either is our Pasolini of today or desperately wants to be our Pasolini of today. So I think what all those titles have in common was like an exploitative quality and was basically a provocative quality of like, how do I get under your skin? And these are the movies that help me do this.
Yeah.
And like I said before, though, going back to wrap this little speech up, Climax still transcended all these things.
Right.
It still had its own vibe, still had its own feeling, and now I think is worthy to be added to a lot of that list up front.
Yeah, I find it really interesting to kick a movie off this way with showing a scene like that where you're just kind of just laying it bare, like these are my influences and I'm not afraid of that. Like I feel like sometimes with this show, you kind of run into the whole thing of like, do filmmakers really want their influences, displayed?
Sure.
But I mean, there he is just putting it right out there, and I think that's interesting.
Yeah, the thing is that when I first saw it, because it is one of the opening shots of the film, the second shot or something, I thought, man, is this brave or is this kind of cowardly?
Right.
Because I was like, is this trying to cut us off at the mount and say, okay, I know it's like these, what I mean? And these are pretty sophisticated references. The average audience isn't going to be knowing most of these films. Unfortunately, I think these movies are out there for people to see, and hopefully they do, because they are extremely good films. And so at first I was kind of like, oh, what is this? Is this a stunt?
Right.
And but then as soon as the film really started, all those things quickly melted away. And then in hindsight, I saw it as a very brave thing.
Yeah.
As being like, yeah, this is where I come from. This is, I'm the flower of their manure, to put it in a pretty poetic way. And so, yes, I come from these people, and yes, I'm inspired by them, but I have my own vision.
Yeah.
And that's a really cool thing. I mean,
Absolutely.
I run into that all the time. I mean, I like to think about it where I never deliberately reference anything in my films. I never deliberately say, okay, I want to model something after this. And that's because I feel like my influences are so deeply ingrained in me anyway, that I'm gonna do it anyway. It's gonna happen. I'm gonna make something that's similar. Yeah, I feel like I'm always making The Shining. I think I mentioned that to you. I'm just constantly making The Shining.
Right.
And I can't help that. It's just in my DNA now.
Yeah.
So I'm never gonna just make a scene that to me was like, okay, well, here's a little nod to The Shining because I'm already doing that.
Right.
And as long as I'm true to the film and the movie isn't about me, it's about whatever story I'm telling. Then my instinctual choices will be honest, and they will also already have the seeds of all my influences in there. So that's I don't know. This was kind of weird. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think it's cool. And, one more point about this before we move on to some more puzzle pieces is I thought it was kind of interesting as well that Jordan Peele did the same thing in Us a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
I was pretty surprised to see that. It's weird when an idea happens twice in 1 year.
Yeah.
It's pretty random, but
especially those two different filmmakers.
Very different filmmakers, yeah. But yeah, I think they had Chud on there, and they had Home Alone, maybe.
The Right Stuff.
The Right Stuff, right.
Which is also referenced in Captain Marvel. She picks up The Right Stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
So I don't know what's going on with that. Apparently it's The Right Stuff.
Yeah, there you go. You did it.
Yeah,
you did it.
There you go.
I'm
good night, everybody. Yeah, good night, everybody. I learned the rules of the game from watching The Rules of the Game.
Nice.
An old Robert Altman quote.
Oh man! All right, let's go on to some more puzzle pieces.
Okay.
So since you just did all those, I guess I'll go with my first one.
I guess.
Yeah. So my first puzzle piece is a movie I love to talk about, and that is Darren Aronofsky's Mother.
Yep.
It's such an obvious comparison, but that constant build of like this is starting off kind of crazy and it's just getting more and more crazy as it goes.
Yeah.
It's a very similar style, very similar I would say tempo almost of that build up, and just crescendoing to just pure madness. And I mean, I haven't seen many films that are able to build tension and not keep it the same the whole time, but to be able to truly build upon it constantly and really make that craziness bigger and fuller and just harder. It seems harder to really continue to pull off, but it does continue to one up itself.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think there's definitely a big parallel because when I think about Mother, back when Mother came out, it felt like such an angry movie, and I like angry films.
Sure.
Like, I like movies that the filmmaker is pissed off. And one of my all-time favorite films is a movie called The Thief, The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover.
Mm-hmm.
It's an excellent Peter Greenaway film, and it's angry. It's just burning with frustration at the political this and the societal that, and it's it's just wearing its heart on its sleeve, and it's pissed off. And when I saw Mother, I felt, okay, Darren Aronofsky's pissed.
Oh yeah,
and I don't really find this. I don't think there's the same political motivation in Climax as there is Mother.
Yeah,
but when I think of the political climate when Mother came out, no one was expecting it.
Right.
Darren Aronofsky was a pretty experimental filmmaker with movies like Pi and Requiem for a Dream, which was extremely challenging.
Yeah.
But he had gone on to have more mainstream success, and Natalie Portman won an Academy Award, and he had done Noah, which was like this really weird movie that no one really knew what to do with, but it had a huge summer blockbuster budget.
Mm-hmm.
So he was kind of like this weird little, film. No one really can put their thumb on him. And then he came out with Mother, and I think it was a shock to the system for American audiences. And so I think, just to kind of expand on what you said, I think that Noe probably saw that film and was deeply inspired to go like, okay, if this is coming out in America, someone's going to release this movie.
Yeah.
Maybe I can make, I could do something similar that is going to be a jolt to the system.
Yeah.
And you're right. They all kind of, they are the structure of unraveling.
Yeah.
They kind of unravel. And that's how the movie, because they're not very plot oriented, either of them.
Right.
They're set up and punchline.
It's almost like experience,
they're all experience
movies.
based.
Yeah.
They're very idea driven.
Mm-hmm.
They're not plot driven. And typically when you don't have a strong plot, that opens you up to be more, and this is a word that I use, cinematic.
Yeah.
Thing is, that's a subjective term and people would define it differently than I define it.
Right.
But I try to think of cinematic as, not being beholden to dialogue, being able to explore the story in more abstract visual ways, using sound design to tell your story, using color to tell your story, using your camera. And these were both films, Mother and Climax, that abandoned a traditional plot and was able to just create an atmosphere.
Yeah.
That to me, that's ultimately cinematic. So I definitely see a huge parallel there.
Absolutely. One last point on that is another thing about Mother is I feel like probably a lot of the films, obviously, this podcast wasn't around when Mother came out, but probably a lot of the films that we would have pointed to as inspirations for Aronofsky would have been on this list as well for this one.
Sure. Yeah. The thing is, Darren Aronofsky is kind of an artsy fartsy guy. He comes from the European film school that I was really a part of and grew up watching and admiring. And also, but there's also I think what's great about more modern American filmmakers is like we could look at the austere European films, Fellini and Bergman, but there's also kind of this B movie grindhouse midnight movie side that we all kind of experience too, of Pink Flamingos and El Topo and Zombie and so it's this weird merging of the highbrow versus the down and dirty.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a uniquely, I mean Noe is French, but there's something almost, he fits in, I think, when it's funny. This is kind of ironic because Climax takes a lot of pride in being a French film.
Yeah,
it has a banner. It's like, this is 100% French or something along those lines.
Yeah.
but to me, that's a very American gesture,
right?
To have this national pride.
I think it's tongue in cheek.
I think so. Yeah, I don't think he was making it seriously.
Yeah,
but it's very American. I think Climax. I expected it to play for 36 hours in America, and now it was in the biggest theater at a casino.
Yeah,
it's been there for 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So I think it's doing better than anyone anticipated. Although I don't know if Noe's a genius like this, but he might have known this could have done better in America than any of his other films.
Right.
I don't know. I'm just speculating.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I mean, it's such a weird movie. I'm glad that it's getting a little more successful than maybe anyone thought it would be.
Me too. Yeah. It should be seen.
Yeah, absolutely.
It should be seen because just from an experience, I can't remember a time when I was so uneasy.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
I was truly uneasy in the movie.
Absolutely. So, what's your next puzzle piece?
All right, so I'll do an obvious one. Get it out of the way. I'm pretty positive this wasn't in that opening shot that I discussed earlier. I think it's one that he may have just mentioned, and that I think once you see it, there's a lot of parallels. It's a movie called Possession.
Mm-hmm.
So, Possession was a movie made in 1981. Relatively hard to see the original director's cut because it was banned in a lot of countries and it was edited heavily. About 45 minutes were actually taken out of the American release.
Wow.
So, heavily edited. But it was a very famous sequence of the female character who's slowly becoming possessed with this demon by making love to this demon monster. Mm-hmm. She has a demonic breakdown in a subway, kind of a underground tunnel. And it's very, very famous and beautifully acted and terrifying. And I think there's a quality to Possession, almost like the sexualized. Although I think Climax is ironically less sexy than I anticipated with a name like Climax.
Right.
And also seeing films like Love and Irreversible, which are so heavy and sex dominated.
It does shy away from a lot of the sex.
Shockingly.
Yeah.
I was not expecting that.
Yeah.
But I also like that I didn't expect it. He meant the climax was in a different way, in
right.
a more filmic way, a more cinematic way, as opposed to the sexual connotations to the word. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, Possession. Entire sequences visually were even kind of similar to Possession, as well as content and the kind of underlying dread mixed with sensuality. So I think Climax probably owes quite a bit to Possession.
Yeah, I actually have never seen Possession, but I have been wanting to. It's on my short list of movies to watch because not only this, but I remember when Mother came out, just to go back to that point I was just making, I remember that was one of the number one things that people were bringing up as this is so much like Possession. And I was like, well, shit, I got to see Possession.
Yeah, apparently any wacky female character is like Possession. And that's the thing, we have... just recently are we getting more fleshed out, interesting female characters. Mm-hmm. And usually prior to that, female characters were just kind of like these emotional breakdown type roles.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So it's kind of interesting to see how influential a movie like Possession was, even though it was hard to get a hold of.
Yeah.
The film female actors in a lot of the director from Possession, he's a Polish gentleman, and his last name eludes me at this moment. But they said that he treated women like he feared them and he kind of abused them in cinema. He made them go to the ends of the earth in their performance, and he got all his frustration out that he actually had in real life. He got out and kind of directing women. So there's a lot of misogyny intermixed with how women are projected in cinema and how they're kind of characterized. And so it's really interesting because I think we've gone past that. A movie like I don't know if where I'm drawing these strings trying to connect them. But I feel like Darren Aronofsky was like the first generation of revisiting a character like we found in Possession, which had this kind of misogynistic stamp on it.
Right.
And now I think in a movie like Mother, maybe even more so than Climax, where the women characters are celebrated. She's the Mother Earth. The villain really is the Javier Bardem character. So we take the same similar formula of this woman idea kind of breaking down, and yet we're seeing two opposite sides of it. We're seeing the demonic witch that's he wrote it during a divorce for Possession, and then we have the mother character, which is like Mother Earth, which is we all want to come back to her.
Right.
So, I don't know. It's just interesting that like you can take two sides of the exact same thing, and as long as your philosophical idea is different, it makes it a very different movie.
For sure.
I guess the ultimate point I'm trying to ramble and make. But yeah, no. Sorry, everybody, for all that. But it's just interesting. Both you should watch them side to side and really see the different approach.
Yeah.
These movies are all about ideas.
Yeah.
And so you can take a similar formula ultimately, and you can make different political comments, and you can make different movies with different visions with very, very similar materials.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, speaking of, making political statements with movies, this one's one of our buckets that we sometimes do, where it's more of just an overall thing. Zombie movies in general is something that I felt was an inspiration for this movie. Major spoiler alert, of course, although we always expect everybody to have watched the movie when they listen to this. But, these people have drinking some sangria that's been spiked with LSD, and they're all absolutely losing their fucking minds. And as they're starting to lose their shit, I mean, they're just kind of almost reverting to like an animalistic kind of state of being where there's not really much consciousness left to a lot of them. They're just dancing, and the dancing starts to look almost zombie-ish in a way, as they're just like kind of stomping and moving their way through the rooms and everything. And there just doesn't really seem to be much brain power involved anymore. They're all on autopilot and in a very strange animal kind of way. And that's, kind of what the best of zombie movies do.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, at their core, zombie films kind of started as political films. We have like Dawn of the Dead's about consumerism and these kind of big, broad brushstrokes of what they're kind of are meant to represent. And now we've totally gotten away from that in the genre. Now it's more traditional horror stuff. But yeah, they were like very idea-driven films. Yeah, and even programming Night of the Living Dead, the first black main character, the hero character for the most part in cinema. So they had a lot of heft to them. And but no, I agree. I feel like there's an animalistic quality to the dancers. And why I thought to myself, like, well, why are they dancers? Like, why? What's with this evil dancing thing? I had just seen the remake of Suspiria. I had seen the original Suspiria, and I was like, what's going on with dancing? Why is that so evil? But I think it's because I think where the parallel comes from is that it's such a kind of consciouslessness. We just do things physically, and sometimes the emotion or the music kind of takes over in dancing.
Right, you're letting
Not that I'm
it
a big
take over.
dancer.
Yeah.
Not that I'm a big dancer, but I feel like when you see someone who's really great at dancing, they let go, and they're almost out of control.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a nice visual parallel to be made between the zombie movements of someone who's brain dead and really being, having this drug take over their brain, but also just, why they're dancers in the first place is because they submit more to their bodies than their brains to begin with. Yeah.
And, while we're talking about the dancing for a quick second, just to say, some of the choreography is fantastic. From what I understand, they a lot of it is kind of improv-ish. Like, they just let these people go and do the thing that they do. Yeah. But I mean, like that first opening number is like freaking ridiculous.
That's the only one that's choreographed.
Is it?
Yeah. Everything else is improv, but that
so
opening,
much cool stuff.
Yeah, that's a one take.
Yeah.
So they shot that entire thing without editing. There's no shots. There's no cuts. It's just one take, and that is the only one that's actually choreographed. But
Wow.
it's stunning.
Yeah, and the other ones are amazing too. Like I really love the one where it's shot from overhead.
Above, yeah.
Oh my god! It doesn't even look real. Like it doesn't look like human bodies like move
Right.
like that. You know? Yeah, it's weird.
That's a great example of like what a certain angle can do, where
Yeah.
you put your camera from above, and then of course your subjects and how those two things relate together. But yeah, it's hypnotic.
Yeah.
I think that I mean this sounds kind of cavalier and simple, but I definitely think Noe attempts to hypnotize you
Sure.
in the sense of like a magician.
Mhm.
His movies are disorienting. His movies will catch you off guard, which I think makes if they're scary, makes it heightened, or if it's sexy, makes it heightened, or is it tragic? It's, all those things feel very heightened.
Yeah.
I remember the beginning of Irreversible, the camera's basically just spinning like on a corkscrew essentially, and we see these horrific violent images, but we can't make out 90% of it.
Yeah.
And it's even scarier because we can't quite see everything, and we're kind of knocked off the curb. We don't really know where we're at, and the disorienting factor becomes hypnotic. And that's even with the music. Speaking of dancing, the music is endless.
Yeah, electronic music, just like
for 90 minutes
loop.
straight. I don't think there's, except for the very beginning when they speak, I'm not sure there's times without music.
Yeah.
So it becomes this relentless hypnotic feeling, and it's scary.
Yeah.
It's troubling to say the least.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What's your next puzzle piece?
So I'll just do a quick one because I don't want to expand on it too much. There's a movie called Frostbitten.
Okay.
And people go crazy after their punch bowl gets spiked.
Yeah, that sounds like a inspiration to this movie.
Yeah, that's the shortest thing I've ever said on the show.
By the way, all right, so again, spoilers, but am I an awful person, or did you also laugh when they cut to the kid drinking a little bit of it, and you're like, "Oh no!"
Well,
God damn it!
Well, no, yeah, I don't know if I laughed, but I definitely was like, "Fuck."
Yeah.
And what's his name? Tio?
I think
Tito?
So. Tio, I think.
I think Tio. I was like, Tio, what are you doing, man? Go to bed,
Tio.
man. No, yeah. So no, no, you're not a terrible person, and it's funny, and not to get like overly academic with this kind of thing, but it's just worth mentioning. And I think I've mentioned this before when we've talked about scary movies, but like there's such a relationship between horror movies and comedy films.
Yeah.
And because I think it's a similar response. Like laughter is a response to pressure.
Yeah.
And that's what we feel, sometimes when you're scared, you're like, because you're frightened, and the first thing that comes out is you laugh.
Yeah.
And that's it's funny that you mentioned that, because when that scene happened, I actually had a reaction. I was like, oh boy.
Yeah.
Because there's a okay, that's the thing. That's an interesting critique, because it's relatively predictable that something's happened to that kid.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But now it's no longer a matter of what's going to happen, but how it happens.
Right.
And that it's almost like, when you watch the Titanic, you go in knowing they're sinking.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no mystery in if they're going to hit the iceberg. Now it's a matter of what happens on the way to the iceberg. And so I think Climax, because the wheels start falling off, and we quickly as an audience start feeling it out, and like, oh, this is not good. The dread is so thick, you have to brush it away from your face, that it's definitely not about surprise, as opposed to I guess maybe it's you're surprised to see how it all actually unfolds.
Sure.
More than what is happening itself.
Absolutely.
So yeah, Tio, I knew he was gonna go.
Yeah, poor Tio.
I loved how he went though.
Yeah.
Can we mention
abrupt. Sure.
So his mom, here real quick, a recap for anyone who hasn't seen it. His mom realizes they're all on acid and shit's going south, not going well, and trying to be a good mom, but in a really stupid French acidy way, is like, I'm going to stick my child into a very dangerous closet with a power supply, some type of, janky power supply. Exposed. Yeah. And she's like, don't touch it. And then locks him in. And so, okay, like again, as an audience, we're going, he's fucking going to touch it and he's going to die.
Yeah.
So it's not what's going to happen. We know, but now it's like when.
Right.
When. So now that's what's interesting about this thing. It's worth talking about for a second. Because at first we said, okay, we know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Now it's a question of how. Well, with the kid, we know both those things are removed. Now it's like, when?
Yeah.
We know he's going to die, and we know how he's going to die. When is it going to happen?
Yeah.
And it was, so I thought to myself, oh, is this going to be effective? Like, are they going to be able to pull this off? And then off screen, we're in some other room.
Yeah, much later.
Much later.
30 minutes later or something.
The mom's looking for the key, because now she lost the fucking key to get the kid out of the closet, which is a brilliant stroke. I love that. She's like searching for the key. And all of a sudden, the power just goes out for like a split second. And then they all celebrate because they're high on acid. and Tio's dead. And you just hear like a thud. And then the mom screams.
And the one dude's like, don't worry, I got my ghetto blaster.
Yeah. The music keeps going.
So we could keep the music going.
Yeah, so anyway.
That's what's important.
This is not good podcasting because we're just rambling, describing sequences.
I love it.
But it's worth talking about. I just like that he did. That's the thing is, we try to get inside movies, especially with podcasts like this. We try to understand movies better. For people that are just movie enthusiasts, the people that are filmmakers, I think this could be potentially a informational program.
Sure.
And not just because we know everything. That's an informational for me. Yeah. Conversations are really how I absorb things and I learn things or I see them in a different light. So it's cool to me that you'd think on the surface, well, you want to keep suspense. You don't want to tell your audience how, when, where.
Yeah.
You want to keep all those things hidden.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily just playing that card every time. You can take something and you can use the audience's anticipation against them as long as it's a fresh way to do it.
Yeah.
So there are no rules in a nutshell. There's no right way to do it or no right way to make a scary movie. But if you have the vision and you can think outside the box, it's usually more effective.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of visions in scary movies, my next puzzle piece.
That was a good one. That's a good transition.
Nice, thank you. So this might seem a little just out of nowhere here, but follow me. The movie Event Horizon.
Oh yeah. The best hell sequences ever.
Yes.
And Sam Neill is also in Possession.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah. Event Horizon scared the shit out of me as a kid.
It's horrifying.
Yeah, it is so fucking scary. And I know it's a silly movie, but it's
dumb.
It's not a good movie, but it's so goddamn scary.
Yeah, it's scary.
And I would compare once things have really gone off the rails in this, when the camera's really on the move, and the lights have started blinking red, and the music is really like crescendoing and like a constant like loop, and everyone's dancing these weird dances. There were points, so I should mention I saw this movie the second time. I was a little stoned, and by a little I mean a lot of stoned, too stoned. But I could swear, and maybe I got to watch it a third time to be sure of this, but some faces were distorting. Like, I mean, it was creeping me the hell out in the way Event Horizon did.
Wow, okay, so it tapped in.
Yeah,
so
it tapped into a primitive fear of what hell is probably like, and it's a lot of French people dancing.
Yeah, I'll go. Sign me up. If that's hell,
wouldn't you?
Yeah, I would love it. I would love it. That's the best hell I could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
Just kind of like a weird quasi-gay, like jam night in a French dance hall. That better be hell.
So freaking weird.
Yeah, I'd start believing in hell if that was hell. Someone started a religion with that, and y'all sign up. But anyways, I it's funny. I like that you mentioned that because it definitely feels weird, like on the surface of how those things connect. But they connect, I think, because I feel like the scary parts of Event Horizon are so bone chilling.
Yeah.
They really do. I mean, I haven't seen it since I was a kid, so maybe it's like going back and playing GoldenEye when you're like, it's the best game ever, and it's not. Right. But no, Event Horizon, I know it's not a good movie, but it is terrifying.
Yeah.
Those hell sequences.
Yeah. They're just, whoever like set designed that or whatever, production design, it's like, oh my God, their nightmares must be awful.
Exceptional. I agree. And the girl's head catches on fire in Climax.
Yeah.
It starts being like hell.
Yeah.
It's very hellish.
It is. Everything's red and black and like,
Well, that's funny. This kind of segues. This is one of those half-ass puzzle pieces that I want to get out of the way quickly because I have such a long list. But I wanted to mention that Noe is kind of a self-referential guy. And so I think that Irreversible is a big influence on this project. I think he kind of went back to some of his roots with this because, I mean, with like, Enter the Void, we get the neon element stuff. But in Irreversible, red really represented bad stuff.
Right.
And I feel like Noe's one of those guys that is extremely expressionistic. He's not going for realism. And yet it's this weird, dreamy fantasy realism. Like, it feels brutally real because it's so violent and it's so scary and it's so earthy. It gives you the illusion that it's realistic. And an average audience member, and that, when I say average, I mean the normal. You don't have to be. It's not saying you need to be super smart or anything. The person who should be experiencing this movie, the average viewer, isn't going to be consciously thinking about what the light is doing to them on a subconscious level. That's not. If they did think that, the filmmakers would be failing.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying you should be in there critiquing it as it happens. But the thing is, you can tell your story via light, and in those ways, and via color, and in those ways, he's extremely expressionistic. Yeah, it's like red. Okay, we know something's bad going on. Green. Yeah. I mean, this is not how we really perceive light and color in our lives, and yet because all the things that are happening seem so real, we don't even think about those expressionistic gestures.
Sure.
And then it just amplifies the terror that we feel. It actually makes reality feel more real or realer than, even though there's all the details are morphed and strange and not realistic, it actually makes the real elements feel realer. And that's a weird Ouroboros that I'm still trying to solve when I create stuff. I'm like, well, how do I make something feel realer, even though I'm deliberately altering it and then, in essence, making it unreal?
That makes it exciting for you, I'd imagine.
I don't know.
No,
I'm always taking a gun in my mouth. You hear the weird shit I just said? Making it realer while simultaneously making it unreal.
Made sense to me.
These are conversations I have with myself and with my staff, and it's like it's always a challenge of how to pull it off. And this was just insanely effective.
Yeah. Well, if nothing else, speaking of irreversible, the spinning camera comes back at the end of the end of the climax.
Yeah,
so.
he does. That's like his shtick.
Yeah.
But again, that's this. It's I don't give a shit as long as it's effective.
Yeah.
I wrote a thing. I watched a movie last year called the House That Jack Built, and it's a Lars von Trier film. And I didn't like it because it felt manipulative. It's kind of a really dark comedy about a serial killer.
Right.
And it's this isn't a puzzle piece, it's just kind of worth mentioning real quickly. But it's kind of Lars von Trierian in the sense that it's extremely provocative and it seems like it's smart, but it's really not smart.
Right.
I mean, in my opinion, there's a lot of diehard Von Trier people out there, so don't write any hate mail or anything. But for me, it's super hit and miss. He made Breaking the Wave, so you can never take away his genius. But the House that Jack Built, this felt like him jerking off on the camera. I'm just tired of him jerking off. It's like he's like the Louis C.K. of filmmakers. He's gonna call you on the phone and jerk off, and that's what Lars von Trier does with most of his cinema, especially now. And so it felt this, so now fast forward to Climax, and it's another manipulative film, and it's going for shock, and it's just trying to get a response out of me. It's doing all the same things that Von Trier was trying to do. Why do I like Climax and not The House That Jack Built?
Yeah.
Kind of going back to that theme that like there's no fucking rules, there's no way of doing it. It's because Climax was authentic, it was visceral, it made me actually connect to it.
Yeah,
I was transported. When I was watching The House That Jack Built, it was a academic, masturbatory, nonsensical jerkfest.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel emotionally connected to it. Just because you quote Dante doesn't mean you're smart.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't just inject intelligence into something and therefore it's, reference something that's, scholarly and then it's smart. Climax, it has none of that.
Yeah.
Even though it has like all these references up front.
Yeah.
Here's all these smart movies. Are you an art house person? Do you know who Refn is? Do you know who Pasolini is? Blah, blah, blah. You can take it as almost a challenge, and yet all that melts away.
Yeah.
And it's just this super powerful movie.
Well, while we're on this track, before we get to my next puzzle piece, that makes me want to ask you, what do you think was the point of all this? Like, what do you think he's trying to say with this movie?
Nothing. I think he's trying to scare us.
Yeah.
I really do, which is enough if it works well. If I was actually scared, which I was, I think that's the right thing. I don't think that Noe is a philosopher. I don't think he has any real point. I think he actually made this movie because it only had a 5-page script. He made it quickly so that he could get into the festival circuit for 2017. Or I'm sorry, pardon me, 2018. Excuse me, I'm a year behind. No, 2018.
Yeah.
That's it. He was like, I need something I can shoot on a low budget in a small place with few actors that I could do. And he set a challenge for himself. What's amazing to me is that he's primarily a stylist, and yet such an effective stylist at times that I can't knock him.
Right.
I don't think he's saying anything in particular. I think maybe you can extrapolate stuff of like, the human element is a beast within. You can put whatever you want on it.
Yeah.
Give us some alcohol, give us drugs, and we become these base monsters.
Yeah.
So you can definitely bring some philosophy to it. Is there any really there? I don't know. But does that make it not as good of a film? And in my case, I think it resonated with me so much. It worked so well that I don't take any points away for it being not a particularly smart quote unquote film.
Sure.
So that's tough because usually for me, the meat and potatoes of a movie is like a good idea.
Right.
Is a strong philosophical concept or a challenging moral dilemma. Like I eat that shit up. I mean, that's what I usually think. Oh, that really makes the movie a step above, is it has all that stuff to it.
Yeah.
But then when you walk into a movie like Climax, it's an experience.
Yeah.
And all that stuff becomes less important.
Yeah, I agree. I there's a couple of like loose ideas of what I think this was about, but I think ultimately they're all just kind of something I'm putting onto it, you know, where I don't think he really I think he was kind of like, make of it what you will. I just want to make some creepy shit and show a bunch of dancers dancing and really coolly shot, scenes.
It felt like a scientist in a laboratory.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It felt like a person really so I respect the craft of filmmaking as a person who makes films, and it's so hard to do and to do well and to pull all these strings together and make them work. It's really challenging. And so you see a filmmaker like him who is really in command of his own brand of filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
He has a style, he has a thing, he has a gimmick with his cameras and things like that. And they're always, NC-17 or X-rated or not rated. And he has like this whole thing about him, and you can kind of become bored with that. It can kind of become predictable if you just talk about his films.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go and watch his movies, that's a whole different thing. On paper, he's boring, he's predictable. Right. He's just a guy trying to get a rise out of us.
A provocateur.
Yeah, he's what I think Lars von Trier really is,
right,
which is a boring provocateur.
Yeah.
I think Lars von Trier is boring as fuck. He's fucking boring. And he just bores the shit out of me. And the only reaction he gets is me being pissed at how bored I am, which I guess counts. So good for him. I don't know. But so he's a provocateur before he's an artist. And for me, Noe is an artist before he's a provocateur. I can't say that word several times in a row.
That's a lot of times.
It's a lot. It just broke down. It's just blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so... I know I think I repeat myself every time I'm on here, but if it works, it works.
Right.
And that's like my only criteria. So I don't think that that Climax is going to revolutionize modern philosophy. I don't think there's any like Schopenhauer mixed in there or anything. I think he wanted to mess around. He wanted to try something. I think he wanted to stretch his wings. I think he wanted to make something the way that Rainer Werner Fassbinder would have made it or Pastelin would have made it. But because he is a force, he really is. He's a force, not an intellectual force, not an academic force, but just this weird emotional shock force that he pulls it off most of the time. So I know that's a kind of a convoluted answer, but
I like it. It works for me, man.
It's a movie. It's a real movie.
It is. Yeah. It's unique as shit, dude. It's super unique.
It's about, it tells its story with its camera. It tells its story with its lighting. It tells its story with its sound design.
Yeah.
It tells its story with its performances. It had a 5-page script. That's as cinema as you get, where you're telling its story solely through the feeling it gives the audience. That's powerful.
One thing I thought after the first time I saw it is I'd kill to be able to have a music video that is a 90-minute of a music video.
We could do it.
Yeah,
Let's do
just
it.
A crazy, just freaking...
It would be a ripoff, but we could just put the
beautiful
VHS copy of this movie in the front of our music video.
I'd compose 90 minutes of music that's like beat driven and just like, it'd be crazy. Well,
it's one of those things that like, it's funny. This is a thing that happens all the time. I want to steal it. It's like, fuck, why didn't I do that?
Why didn't I do that?
I want to go make that. And then it's just going to be a bad version of that.
Right,
So you always resist those urges, or hopefully you do. People that don't have the self-control, they see something and go, oh, okay, and they make a bad version of it. When I was a kid writing, I was the worst fucking Hemingway you ever heard of. You know what I'm saying? So you just steal from your influences, and so you still have those urges sometimes. When I walked out of Climax, I was like, oh, I could make a cheap movie in a room. It's super fucked up and crazy.
Yeah.
And then you realize, okay, that's not me though. So that fantasy goes away. It flies away. But that I did feel that.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I could do that. And I could do it well. But then you realize, nah, it's just going to be that.
It'll be fun at least.
Yeah, maybe just as like an exercise.
Well, I've got 2 more puzzle pieces.
Okay,
so I'm going to go with my next one. And This one might seem a little out of left field as well, but this movie is kind of like a worst case scenario within a certain kind of a scene, this club dance scene, you know. And so a different kind of worst case scenario and a different kind of scene is Green Room.
Oh yeah,
In that underground punk scene,
yeah.
and things just going off the rails,
That's a
and
great one.
getting really violent, and getting just kind of like a worst case scenario of a night in that kind of an environment, and showing that kind of environment in a very interestingly authentic way. Because I mean, I've never really seen it. I mean, you know, I'm not gonna like point to like a Step Up movie or something like that, but I mean, I suppose you could. But I've never seen like that dance scene really, you know. And then to see that dance scene go off the rails and go completely insane is interesting. And it was super interesting in Green Room to see that punk culture like really shown so raw and authentically, and then to see that crumble, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. That's actually a great one because I have to maybe revisit Green Room because it didn't really grab me when I saw
It
it.
didn't get me the first time. The second time I watched it, I made myself watch it again because so many of my friends loved it so much.
Yeah.
And the second time, I mean, it just fucking hit me.
Yeah,
Like,
I have to go back
I
then.
loved it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd watch anything with Patrick Stewart, so
Yeah.
that's a little bit of a cheat.
Yeah, right.
But you know, I'll have to go revisit it because now that you mention it, I really see a parallel there, and that's really cool. So yeah, I want to see that. I like that. I mean, what I did like about Green Room is that like the punk scene is so terrible.
Oh,
The
yeah.
punk scene is so, I think, like intrinsic to childhood.
Mhm.
Because you have this whole rebellion thing, and it's basically just fantasy. It's like libertarianism. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like a big fantasy
Yeah.
that adults then, for some of them, still continue into their adult life. But like when you get into punk, you know, and then it's haunting because you slowly realize that it's like inherently conservative, and you're like, that's weird.
Yeah,
I didn't
right.
think, you know. So like it kind of creeps in on you. And I feel like Green Room was cool because these are like violent, gross people. You know what I mean? Yeah, this is not a good look
Yeah.
for an adult person.
Yeah.
It's like people that read Bukowski past 18 years old. That's just not a good look.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's
Right.
like, and that's the thing. That's coming from a guy who was obsessed with Bukowski when I was 14, 15.
Right.
I wanted to be that dude. He was the Tom Waits of literature, the punk drunk, and you know. And I mean, so trust me. I mean, I was ripping that guy off left and right. But when you get a certain age, it's just not. It doesn't. You just all that polish fades. It's not sexy anymore.
Right. Right.
And it kind of reveals itself as being kind of dumb.
Unless you're Matthew McConaughey and the Beach Bum, and then it's still cool, no
Right.
matter how old you get.
Yeah, which is because it kind of glorifies it. That was one of the things I thought of. Was like, this guy just glorifies. Yeah, that's like the eternal Bukowski. So, I don't know, it was kind of funny.
What's your next puzzle piece?
So I'm gonna reference a movie from 2015, a more modern one, a movie called Victoria, and it now holds the record, as far as I'm aware, as the longest single take movie of all time. It's 135 minutes, and it's a single take. Before that, it was the very first film to do it was a movie called Russian Ark, which is a beautiful movie. It's 90 minutes, and it goes through a Russian museum and kind of goes in and out of history and time. Very elaborate. Took 3 takes to actually be able to shoot it all in a choreographed take. But anyway, so Victoria, not only is the long take something that influenced Noe, because he did a lot of long takes in Climax.
Oh yeah.
A lot of unbroken things. Because another big thing about Climax, I think, is that it was purposefully testing our patience. It, you know, for instance, the movie's done in basically segments. So we have the opening sequence we mentioned where people are talking into the video camera or into the television. Then we have like these little weird scenes of people chatting around the dance studio, which goes on for like 20 minutes.
Oh yeah.
Then we have another 20-minute sequence of people dancing from above.
Yeah.
And then all hell breaks loose.
Yeah.
And then it's these long extended takes. So I feel like when you watch movies that are in a single take, there's a novelty element. Like Victoria, there's a novelty element, almost as if you're saying, is this going to work?
Right.
I mean, obviously they released the one that worked.
Yeah.
But there's still a feeling in you where like, are they going to pull this off?
Yeah.
And every time you watch it, you're like, wow, look at that. That's one take. And so even though it's cool, I think that it's a gimmick that pulls you out of the movie ultimately. What I think Noe was able to see out of it was that this is a great opportunity to fuck with my audience.
Yeah.
The longer I can dangle these shots, and if I can make them only subtly aware that we're doing something technical, and they're going to almost feel like that balancing act, and then I can break that, and I can cut, and I can do something. Because even in the edit of Climax, in most of the cuts, there's a little black piece between each shot.
Yeah, it's like a clean splice. Like
exactly.
Yeah.
So they don't actually cut seamlessly as most films do. Because the other thing is that usually editing, the point of that is that you're supposed to make the film immersive.
Right.
The audience is not supposed to notice the cuts. You create this whole world via the cut. And now in Climax, he's going to throw that shit out the window and just give you a black shot in between major cuts so that you're always aware of the edit. And now you're out of pace. The shots aren't paced properly. The music is pounding. The camera's these long takes, and then it cuts dramatically.
Yeah.
So we're just totally disoriented. And again, that's another way that he's in charge of his craft. And he's like, I'm going to make my cuts even consciously aware. The audience will be consciously aware of my cuts, and yet it's still going to throw them off. It's not going to take them out. It's going to suck them in. That's just a lot of forethought. That's just a smart filmmaker. So Victoria is also about going to a nightclub and meeting somebody that isn't quite as nice as maybe she thought. And so it's kind of a suspense thriller film, kind of a modern film, the nightlife, how dangerous it is to meet strangers. And then, of course, it's also done all in one take. So
right on. Neat. Yeah, so that's multiple levels on how it's like a similar kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's cool. Right on. I've never heard of that one. All right, well, my final puzzle piece. Obviously, we don't see the hallucinations that these people are going through. However, their reactions as non-actors, except for Sofia Boutella, is pretty great. You could tell these people are, really just kind of losing it and really hallucinating like crazy. And so I thought of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Oh, good. Yeah.
It just picturing what they're seeing and what they're experiencing was pretty fun because some of their reactions are pretty great. I think they did a really great job for not being, actual actors or just dancers.
I think so too.
Yeah, they felt like full people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough, especially in that type of movie, to make people feel three-dimensional.
Yeah.
But they just felt so real. There was almost like a documentary vibe to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, no, I can definitely see it's funny, when I first watched Fear and Loathing, and it took me a long time to actually finish it because it was so frustrating. I was just like, stop taking drugs. I was like, just, yeah. And so, it's an interesting experience to where I felt the pressure of their trip.
Right.
I kind of felt like, I definitely see a relationship there as well.
Right on. What do you got for another puzzle piece?
So I have a few. And that was your last one, right?
That was my last one.
So I'm going to mention a couple quick things.
Sure.
And I won't kind of go off into a crazy tangent.
Okay.
Hopefully. Fingers crossed.
We'll see what happens.
Right. I'm not going to limit myself too much. No, I'm just kidding. So the first thing I'll mention is a movie called The Towering Inferno. Because it's basically people trapped by a fire, and how do they escape? And even though that's something a little bit more on the less trippy end of it,
sure,
there's this confinement element to Climax because one of the characters is pushed out into the snow and freezes to death. Actually,
yeah.
So they seem like they're in a pretty remote place. They either don't have the faculties to leave, or they can't leave for a variety of reasons. We don't know exactly, but they're kind of locked in this hell.
Yeah.
And while the fire in Towering Inferno is more of a traditional imagery of hell, then the light, the redness, the trapped element, the multiple people, many characters trying to survive, I think it draws from almost like the old school horror of a Towering Inferno.
Sure.
The next thing I'm going to mention is a movie called The Mother and the Whore. And this is really about, this is one of those highly intellectual French movies. It's about a misogynistic, chauvinistic guy that basically sleeps with a bunch of people. And then he meets this girl, Veronica, who's sexually liberated. And he basically just has a crush on her and tries to sleep with her. That's the premise of the movie. It takes place in 1960s Paris. So that, I think, for me, it's more about the culture element, because there was a French element to Climax. Obviously, it's a French film, so it's in French language.
Yeah.
But there's also, I think, it's funny when I think as outsiders, I don't know if Noe knows this, but as outsiders, we have this kind of glorification of a place like Paris. I do personally. That's my favorite city in the world. I could be in the ghetto in Paris and I'm floating on clouds. I love,
sure.
And I don't, it's because I'm bringing a romantic projection onto it.
Right.
To how a lot of Europeans feel about America. They think this is the American dream. They
Las
believe
Vegas.
It. Yeah.
Las Vegas.
Yeah. Stucco and air conditioning. So when I think about the Mother and the Whore, Obviously, it's a sexualized film. It's a cultural film. It has a '60s Parisian vibe, and I think that was kind of carried into Climax. I think there's almost like a psychedelic '60s quality to Climax. Obviously, there's a French element to it, so there's just things that were parallel for me.
Right on.
The other thing I'm going to mention is Eraserhead.
Okay.
Because I think it's one of those cornerstone horror films of surrealism that I think you just really can't get away from. I think it's disturbing almost in a similar way as Eraserhead Climax was.
Yeah, no, I could see that for sure.
You know what I mean? Because there's a surrealism and a discomfort.
Yeah.
Sound design is so crucial in Eraserhead nowadays. Eraserhead is often studied for its use of sound design and how revolutionary it was and how effective it was to creating this eerie world and atmosphere. And I think Climax it wouldn't be what it was without its music.
Yeah, speaking of sound design and the music too, but just to quickly as we wrap this up, go back to poor Tio electrocuting himself. That chunky as the lights went out. Oh wow, that was. Yeah, that really got you, know.
Just the screaming down the hallway.
Oh yeah,
where we would hear screams from a different part of the building.
Yeah.
These were extremely effective things.
Oh yeah.
The girl whose head caught on fire, you could hear her screaming as she runs away.
That's when it was like just really like wow, just off the fucking deep end.
It's one of that. I think for me I think all this happened when she basically forces an abortion on that girl by punching her in the stomach.
Yeah.
For me, I was like, okay, we're in a Noe film. Okay, I got it. I'm in. Next thing I want to mention really quick is a movie called Fox and His Friends by Rainer Werner Fassbinder. Noe came out and actually said I wanted to make a movie like Rainer Werner Fassbinder, so I feel like Fassbinder made over 35 films, closer to 40 films actually. He died at 36, so that's the kind of output he was doing. So there's a lot. I think his entire catalog is something that was going to be influenced, through Climax. But that film in particular, I'm going to mention a movie called Angst, which is about a troubled man who gets released from prison and starts taking out his sadistic fantasies on an unsuspecting family living in a secluded home. And I just read that synopsis because it was harder to say. I was like, how am I going to summarize this movie?
Right.
So
that's good.
So that one, it's just a violent, bizarre. That to me, it's like a discharge, an exercise of this violent tendency.
Sure.
And I think Climax is almost like that too. Even in the word climax, even the title, it represents this like discharge, this like crescendo, this thing that we're arriving at.
Yeah.
And Angst has that same idea with like these feelings are bottling up in this character, and then he just exercises this demon in him, like on this family. There's this kind of like release element that's bodily, that's a philosophical idea. It's very disturbing. So there's something there. And then the last one I'm going to mention, and we can talk about it just for a moment longer, is the Lars von Trier film Antichrist.
Yeah.
So have you seen Antichrist?
You know what? I never have seen Antichrist.
Don't see it. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's Lars von Trier. You can miss it.
Sure. But yeah, no, I remember when it came out, and I'd heard a lot about it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some clit snipping in that. They cut off a clitoris with a scissor.
Yeah.
She bashes Willem Dafoe's penis with a large piece of wood and then ejaculates his blood.
Yep.
Fun stuff for the kids, for the family.
Yeah.
But to me, it's funny because another thing I read about this film is that there was a deliberate attempt to make a Lars von Trier type movie with this movie. And the reason why I wanted to bring up Antichrist is because it has so much potential. Like, Lars von Trier is not untalented. He's just an idiot. I mean, he's just not smart enough for what his movies suggest.
Right.
And I don't think that's the case with Noe. I think he's actually as smart as his movies. I think he's putting out, he knows what he's doing. He has more of a sure hand. Doesn't always work. He takes risks, and sometimes it's better than others. But he was attempting to make a Lars von Trier film by making something that just is trying to elicit a reaction from us.
Right.
And just to kind of bring it full circle and kind of mention what I said earlier, when it works, it works.
Yeah.
I feel it's almost insulting when I watch a Lars von Trier film and he's like, I'm just trying to get a reaction out of you, because he wraps it in this intellectual mumbo jumbo.
Right.
But then Noe, who was obviously inspired or admires Lars von Trier in some way, shape, or form, and set out deliberately to make a movie modeled after his films, supersedes all of every von Trier film I've seen. It supersedes it. He actually makes it better because he's ultimately true to himself. He strips down these ideas to their nuts and bolts. He makes them human and scary and terrifying and visceral. It leaves all that bullshit intellectualism, that pseudo intellectualism at the door that we get a lot with Von Trier. And he makes just a blood curdling human sweaty. I was sweaty.
Yeah,
I was sweaty.
Yeah. No, it's a very unique kind of horror that just really kind of cuts through.
Yep.
Yeah.
Transcends all the things we talk. All these puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
It's ironic that they you could put it together, but I don't even think you'd get Climax.
Yeah, right.
I think this is the first piecing it together podcast.
Yeah,
where you're going to list the puzzle.
I'm going to list these puzzle pieces, but
and
they're
guess
not,
what?
Yeah,
it's not Climax.
It's not going to happen.
So go for it.
All right, so the finished puzzle we've got Shivers, Salo or the 120 Days of Sodom, Un Chien Andalou, Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome, Suspiria, Zombie, Querelle, Mother, Possession, Zombie Movies, Frostbitten, Event Horizon, Irreversible, Green Room, Victoria, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, The Towering Inferno, The Mother and the Whore, Eraserhead, Fox and His Friends, Angst, and Antichrist.
Mm-hmm. Not to be confused with Fox and Friends. That's
also scary.
Yeah, it's not. It's Climax isn't as scary as one viewing of Fox and Friends. Let's just put it that way.
So, closing thoughts. I do want to mention one thing to you here that you did not bring up, and I found this on IMDb. I don't know, there was no citation or anything, so I don't know if it's correct or whatever. But you being my Stanley Kubrick loving friend, apparently in the trivia section, Gaspar Noe says he wanted to make a psychological drama that is the counterpoint to Stanley Kubrick's 2001, so much so that instead of seeing the apes evolve into humans, Climax is like the humans going back to being apes. Humans going back to their original forces.
Yeah.
That's a little too much.
No,
much for you.
No, I eat that shit up. That's great. Yeah. I think it's bullshit.
Yeah.
But
that plays right into what we were saying earlier, that it's like you could attach a lot of meaning, but it's like, it's really just like fucking with you and like doing dark.
Yeah. I mean, I totally believe that Noe said that. But I would bet $1 billion that he came up with that after the fact.
Yeah, right.
And that's the thing is, most great films are open to interpretation. You can talk to anyone about Mulholland Drive and it's going to be different, every time you talk to them. You can't really nail that film down. So good films, a lot of times that's a generalization, but good films for the most part are fairly ambiguous. I mean, that's the thing is 2001: A Space Odyssey is the ultimate art house masterpiece. It's the ultimate art film. You know what I mean? And it has to me, it's some of the headiest, most challenging philosophical filmmaking of all time. And yet it's not this standoffish intellectual movie. That's the thing with Stanley always, people say that, he's kind of cold and calculating and intellectual.
Right.
But when he turns off HAL 9000 in that red room, that's emotional. When the German girl sings to all the French soldiers at the end of Paths of Glory, that's emotional. So he was a very emotional filmmaker. He's a visceral filmmaker, and I have no doubt in my mind that Noe was influenced by Stanley.
Sure.
I had The Shining on my list, but I didn't mention it. I had too many movies.
Restraint, ladies
guess
and gentlemen.
What? It's influenced by The Shining. And guess what? It's influenced by 2001. Show me a movie that's made that isn't influenced by 2001.
Sure.
And I will sell you a pink donkey.
Well, aside from going into a whole Shining spiel, do you have any other final notes on this movie?
No, just that it confounds me. That's the thing is I love finding movies that go against these these rules that you set for yourself, and not willingly. Sometimes you just get it in your head of like, this is a good movie and this is a bad movie. And I try to refrain from that a lot. I mean, I have my opinions. Trust me.
Yeah.
You guys have to listen to me talk about them. But what's the thing is really ultimately though, I just love movies. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I love movies, and all of these arbitrary rules are exactly that. They're arbitrary, and they leave the moment that I find a movie that I connect with that happens to break those rules. That's why it's a big jerk off. So, I just love cinema, and so when I saw Climax, it felt like a trip truly to something cinematic. And I've been very fortunate to be able to talk about a handful of movies on this program where I felt that way, because it's pretty rare, actually. I've been lucky, like a handful of movies we've talked about, I've described as cinematic. And it's almost like losing its value, because like every time I'm on here, like, it's purely cinema. Yeah. But it is rare.
Yeah.
It's not, you get 1 or 2 movies a year that really feel like it's a film, that it couldn't be a book, it couldn't be a comic book, it couldn't be a theater play, and Climax could be nothing but a film.
Sure.
They use all of those components to tell us, I don't know, not a story, but tell us a feeling, tell us an atmosphere, tell us a place and time, show us an exercise, and that's just a fun journey. So be scared. Let yourself be scared. I doubt you'll be desensitized because it's pretty shocking stuff. Ironically, it's not as shocking as some of his other films.
Yeah.
I mean, Irreversible was more disturbing because it was realer.
Sure.
Although I guess you could always drink spiked sangria and kill your friends. That's pretty real too, I guess.
Yeah, join a dance troupe in France.
Yeah, that's very possible.
Yeah.
But like the rape sequence in Irreversible left a burn mark on my brain.
Right.
Truly disturbing. And to me, that has more of a political connotation to it because this is a crime that's suffered by real people. I mean, so is murder, but we've had such a suspension of disbelief for murder in movies.
Yeah.
We look at movies like, no big deal.
Right. It doesn't mean anything anymore.
Yeah. And so, strangely, it's a tamer movie than some of his past films, but I think it's even more effective. To me, it's more distilled. I think it's his first R rating.
Yeah.
So I mean that maybe people will think he's going soft,
right.
But I don't think so. I think it's a distilled version. It's a crystalline version of what his films are. It's probably his best movie besides Irreversible. Irreversible was like an early career stroke of genius.
Right.
It was like lightning in a bottle. And it was like, I don't know. I think he lucked into it. Yeah. Honestly. I think
a lot of people don't get that twice.
No.
I mean,
I think he had big enough balls to make Irreversible. And I think he made it at a time where it was more acceptable to make those types of films. I don't know if it would do as well now.
Right.
So he kind of got lucky. It was lightning in a bottle. But Climax is a much more together film, and it's better. And I think it's definitely worth seeing. And seeing on a big screen if possible, with good sound.
Absolutely. All right, well, I think that wraps it up. Kris, you want to recommend something? And then I know you just launched your new website, so you want to plug that as well?
Sure, thanks. So recommendations, let's see. I saw The Beach Bum. I liked The Beach Bum. It wasn't brilliant, but it was good. Yeah. And it was funny. Man, was it funny. Much funnier than I thought it was going to be.
Right.
I mean, it's no Gummo, but it's a pretty good Harmony Korine film. So yeah, I should check out Beach Bum. And as you were saying, I just launched the official website for a movie that I've told you guys about a little bit on some previous shows. It's called Madam X. It's the feature film that I'm making. The website is obviously, Madam X Movie. So it's just the letter X, madamxmovie.com. And it's going to have all the information about my movie that's in development and pre-production at the moment. This is the one that I've mentioned a few times that has the support of the Kubrick family. That will be featuring the original paintings of Christian Kubrick as they've appeared in Eyes Wide Shut and A Clockwork Orange, and they will be a part of my film. It's a huge honor. So there's all kinds of information about our insane team. We just signed on a legendary gaffer, a gentleman by the name Jim Planette. He did E.T. and Braveheart and Young Frankenstein and a lot of Steven Soderbergh films. So we just signed him on to do the film with us, and we're extremely excited. We have just a team of legends making this film. So go to the website, check all that stuff out. You can read about our team and what we have and the Kubrick Association, which I'm, of course, deeply humbled by and totally blown away by. So yeah, it's really cool. So go ahead and you can subscribe, and you'll get updates on the movie as we confirm more and more stuff and get this thing made.
Sounds great, man. Well, I think we did it. You want to go dance or something?
Yeah. You have any sangria?
I do.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Picture it. A woman hates Christmas. After she loses her corporate job, she's forced to go back to the small town where she came from, where she helps her parents save their failing Christmas tree business. While she's there, she runs into her ex-boyfriend, who she dumped a decade ago to move to the big city, and they fall in love. And she learns the meaning of Christmas. Yes, another Hallmark movie. A lifetime of Hallmark, where three guys talk about movies on the Hallmark and Lifetime channel and try to make sense of them. Find us anywhere where you can download podcasts.
All right, so that does it for today's conversation about Climax. Again, I really hope you go seek this movie out. It is still playing in some theaters, so hopefully it's in one by you, and if not, then just have a fun night at home watching it because it is crazy. So yeah, that does it for today. Thank you to Kris Krainock for being here again. I always love having him on the show. Uh, we will be doing a whole bunch of new episodes here in the coming weeks. We actually recorded 5 new episodes this week, or actually 3 so far, and we've got 2 more scheduled for during the week. So by the time you hear this, it'll be 4 and then 5. So yeah, we got a lot of episodes we're recording. We got a lot of episodes to post and a lot more piecing it together. So make sure you are subscribed on your podcast app of choice. You can also rate and review us on iTunes. That would be amazing if you did that. We'd love to hear what you're thinking of the show. And you can follow us on social media at PiecingPod. Check out our website, piecingpod.com, and sign up for the mailing list. And last but not least, join our Facebook group, Piecing It Together, a movie discussion group where the conversation continues about all of these movies that we talk about on the show and more. So that about does it. I'm going to leave you guys with a piece of music, and I think I've played this on the show before, but I think it fits for a movie like Climax. So this is a track called Head on Fire from my 3rd album, Head Like Fire. So check it out, enjoy it, drink some sangria, have some fun, and we'll be back soon.
and all points west.